Hello, welcome back to the greenhouse. It is a beautiful day outside, but a little on the warm side, which is weird because we're still in January. But again, I'm in Eastern North Carolina, growing zone 8B, and that's just the way it goes. We get some warm days when storm fronts roll through or by, and then we get cold days when Canada just gets angry at us and shoves that cold air all the way down to Texas. What are you going to do? So today I just want to touch on what I couldn't touch on Friday's video, or the last video, because my microphone wasn't on. Today the microphone's on. I've checked. I just want to touch on how I sow my seeds, and I'm going to do some seed sowing today. I'm actually just going to sow one thing, just a quick demonstration, although many of you expert gardeners out there know how to sow all your seeds, but I want to touch on how I sow my seeds and why. So first, what do I sow my seeds in? So let me show you real quick. This is a little wood seed tray I made. And I made this out of old pallet wood. This one says flowers only. If you make seed trays out of pallet wood, it is important to use heat treated wood. The reason being is it's not chemically treated. Therefore, you don't have to worry about chemicals leaching into your vegetables and herbs and all that good stuff. This one's marked flowers only because I'm pretty sure this came from non-heat treated, and you can grow things like flowers in here. That's not a problem. I don't intend on eating the flowers, so I use this, and I have several others in larger sizes that say flowers only. I've labeled them. I'm not wasting the pallet wood, and it's being put to use. I'm not eating the flowers, so it's okay to grow flowers in something that's not heat treated. Here's a larger tray. I forgot the dimensions on this, but this is a fairly sizable tray. I think it's along the lines of 15 inches by 9 inches, something like that. And you can see it's got slats on the bottom to allow drainage. Again, it's made from pallet wood, but this is heat treated pallet wood. So there's no chemicals in this wood. So I have it marked as veg. So I can grow my vegetables, I can start my vegetables in here. And then when they're of proper size, then I can prick them out and then pot them on into individual pots to grow on. When I first started gardening and I started sowing seeds, I was using the very common 10 by 20 trays. They're about 2 inches deep, 10 inches by 20 inches roughly, and it's a very common standardized size. And you can get these trays all over the internet. I started getting away from those, or I stopped buying those several years ago because, well, the whole plastic's bad thing, and they're not recyclable, so that's a problem. So even if I do throw them in the recycle bin when they do eventually break, they're not going to get recycled. So I stopped buying the plastic 10 by 20 trays, and I started building the wood trays. But I don't have enough wood trays to fill that gap in between me getting away from the plastics and going over to a more natural substance. So I have, over the last few years, purchased some of these. Now, you may have seen this in my last video. This is a plastic seed starting tray, but it's made out of very, very thick plastic. This is not going to break anytime soon. This could last me 10, 20 years, basically the rest of my life, theoretically. So I have this size, which I have no idea. This is probably like a 9 by 6. And then I have this size, which is, I think, something like 15 by 9 as well. And I think they're both made in the UK. I picked these up over at Greenhouse Megastore. So if you like these style trays, you can go over to Greenhouse Megastore, pick them both up. Again, they have adequate drainage holes, so you could just put them on top of your bench. Water goes through them. I've been using them for a few years now. I really like them. They do make humidity domes for them, in case you're worried about that. I'm sorry about the lighting. The sun's going in and out with the clouds. So they do make humidity domes for them. So if you like that style of tray, you could go get those, and again, they should last you forever. Now, yeah, they made out of plastic. Some of you may be opposed to that, and that's fine, but the fact that they're made of such thick, heavy-duty plastic, and then they could last you 10, 20 plus years, maybe in the future, in 20 years or so, they'll be able to recycle things like this, and you won't have to feel bad about buying plastic. The other reusable type of tray that I've purchased, I think I have 3 or 4 of these now, are these little galvanized trays from Gardener Supply. So there's all these individual cells, and each one comes out, and they're tapered so you could press them from the bottom, and then the whole seed plug comes out. The downside to this one is there's no holes on the bottom. So you can drill holes if you wanted to allow for drainage, excess water to go through. I've never done that because, well, I'm probably a little lazy. I am careful about the amount of watering that I do and how I water these. And I'm just cognizant of the fact that there's no drainage holes in the bottom, and I don't want to soak or drown the plants that are in here. Again, you could drill holes in the bottom. It's not a big deal. There's a newer version on Gardener's Supply. That's where I got this from, FYI. Has a water wicking mat on the bottom. So you would, I'm not exactly sure how it works. If I remember, I'll put a thing here up on the screen. But there's a mat on the bottom that absorbs the excess water, and then you don't have to water it as much because that's holding the excess water, and that'll allow your plants to be watered as the roots reach down into the tray. Wanting to move away from the plastics, I'm going to start looking into going old school, and when I up pot or seed start certain things, I'll be putting them into terracotta. The downsides to terracotta, and this I have to point out to you guys, is if you didn't already know, again, expert gardeners with plenty of years experience, there's many of you that do watch this channel, you already know this. The moisture seems to, in my experience here, seems to leave the container faster because terracotta breathes, as it were. And therefore, you have to monitor your watering that much closer. So if you water it in the morning, let's say you have this on a heat mat and you water it in the morning, by the afternoon it can be basically bone dry because the moisture is seeped out of the container and that heat is helping to essentially evaporate or dry out the container. As the terracotta dries, it's drawing more moisture from the soil inside. Therefore, your plant inside can get very dry. So you just have to be cautious when using these in that aspect. Other than that, it's nice because it does warm up, especially here in the greenhouse in the sun. So that means the soil inside is warmer, which is good for the seeds and good for the seedlings as they grow up. If you're worried about the terracotta drying out, you could turn around and put them in, let's say I've done this before, in a 10 by 20 tray that I mentioned before. And I have a bunch of 10 by 20 trays left over. As they break, I don't replace them, but I still have a small pile of them. You can put a bunch of these in the 10 by 20 tray. I don't know exactly how many can fit, depends upon the size of your terracotta pot. I think this is a 4-inch. Either way, and fill the 10 by 20 tray, if it has no holes in it, with water. The terracotta pot will absorb that. The plants will absorb from the terracotta pot, and everything's wonderful. And therefore, everything stays nicely watered. So you would put water into the tray as opposed to watering the pots themselves. Now that's basically all the containers that I sow my seeds into. Now I'm going to sow some seeds and show you what I use and why. So what I'm going to sow today is my Coleus Pinto mix. I'm reading the instructions here and it says cover lightly with mix. Water gently, cover with plastic. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill my container. In this case, we're going to be using one of these larger black trays with my seed starting mix, and I'll show you that in a second. And then I'm going to surface sow these and then cover with vermiculite. Okay, so far as seed starting mix, what I'm using here is Daddy Pete's potting soil. Daddy Pete's is a local brand to me. They're here in North Carolina, and they make their own various soil mixtures. Now, I could use a proper seed starting mix, and I have in the past. Now, last year I started using this potting mix, and I had no problems with it, and all my seeds grew quite well. And this potting mix is just made up of composted cow manure, peat moss, premium aged pine bark fines, perlite, sandy loam, oyster shell, fish meal, crab meal, shrimp meal, earthworm castings, and fossilized bat guano, plus kelp. So unlike most seed starting mixes, and those seed starting mixes can be quite expensive, this is a pretty rich mix. But again, I've grown my seeds in here without a problem, and I think this is just the way I'm going to go going forward, so that I don't have to carry or have seed starting mix and then potting soil and then compost it. Now, the only thing I will mention about this mixture is because there's pine bark in here and some of the chunks are fairly sizable, if I wanted to, and I haven't had really a problem with it, but if I really wanted to, I could turn around and sieve out the pine bark. So here I have a sieve, and if I really am concerned about the pine bark, I could just sit there, do this, and get rid of a lot of the bigger chunks of pine bark or anything else that I really don't want in my mix. but I haven't found the need to really do that, even with very fine seeds. The other benefit I think that comes from using the potting soil is it does retain moisture. Whereas I've used some potting soil mixes that do not retain the moisture in the past. Now this seed starting mix is pretty dry. All I'm going to do right now is just give it a good watering and let that water soak in before putting my seeds down. And you've probably seen or heard other people do something similar, other gardeners, and that's simply so your seeds don't float away. If you add too much water too quickly, the seeds will turn around and they will just sort of float to one side of the tray if you're not on a completely level surface, or they'll pool in one certain area if there's a low spot in your tray. I've had that happen to me before, so I'll have a bunch of seedlings come up over here as opposed to here. I've learned over the years, and I'm a lot more careful now. I don't always do this because sometimes the mix is very wet just coming out of the bag, or other times the seeds need to be planted anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch deep. So I will sow my seeds, cover with mix, and then I can water. They're not going to go anywhere. Coleus seeds are very, very tiny and very fine. I don't know if you guys can see that. That's the Coleus seed right there in my palm. It's very, very fine. And I'm just going to try to sprinkle as evenly as possible. At some point, I will then prick them out of this tray and put them into their own individual pots until they're ready to be planted out in the garden. And then I'm just going to cover with a little bit of vermiculite. They say this helps keep the weeds out and the moisture in. I don't always do this to all my trays, especially if the seed needs direct sunlight to grow. So for instance, the foxglove seeds do not need this. I mean, I guess you could maybe. If you've covered your foxglove seeds before, let me know in the comments below. And that's it. And of course, don't forget to label. All right, so that is the basics of what I sow my seeds in and how I sow my seeds for the most part. Again, there may be certain circumstances where I sieve the potting soil mix. There may be certain circumstances where I direct sow seeds. There's actually a bunch of flowers I plan on direct sowing this year. I haven't had such great luck starting them in the greenhouse. For instance, lupine. Lupine, they start in the greenhouse and they die in the greenhouse. They never survive long enough for me to plant them out in the ground and have any real sort of success. So this year I'm going to try direct sowing them into the ground and seeing what happens there. Sunflowers, I always direct sow simply because I don't have the space normally in the greenhouse towards the end of the seed starting season because it's filled with so many other plants. So I'll just direct sow them out into the ground, probably about late April, maybe early May, once really the ground starts warming up. If you haven't signed up for my newsletter, please go over to growinggreenfinger.com, scroll down the way to the bottom of the page, sign up for that newsletter. I just send out a newsletter once a month at the end of the month, sort of a roundup as to all the videos that were produced, maybe something that's happening behind the scenes. So go ahead and sign up for that. It doesn't cost you anything, doesn't hurt. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. This way you can keep up with Sophie and her antics. You gotta look at the camera. There you go. You thought I was a bad YouTuber. She's worse. And so far this month, I've been putting out 3 videos a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I don't know if you guys noticed that. But this week, I think we're only going to do 2 because I'm going to start working on the back walkway, and that's going to be taking up some time, effort, and energy. So I won't see you guys again until Friday's video, and maybe Friday's video will be showing some of the walkway progress. I'm not even sure what Friday's video is going to be about, but if you guys have any questions, comments, or things you want to see here and around the garden, then let me know in the comments below, and I will try to accommodate. Until then, I'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.